For those who've just joined, we're just waiting a couple more minutes to give everyone a chance to join. So just hold tight, we'll just be a minute or so. Right, I think we can kick off. So welcome everyone. Welcome to today's Employment Hero webinar, Turn AI Anxiety into Action, How to Build an AI-Empowered Team. It's quite the mouthful, but we had a lot to say in that title. So hi, I'm 𝗺cie𝗿𝗲. I lead Research and Insights at Employment Hero, and I'll be guiding the conversation today. So we know, you know, that AI is everywhere. It's in the headlines, it's in our tools, our everyday work. And for most of us, it feels daunting or difficult, I think, and we can kind of all, I guess, sort of relate to that. So we're going to break that down today and share practical, human-focused ways to make AI part of your team's culture, in addition to tech stack. So just a quick bit of housekeeping before we start. This session will be recorded, so you will get that replay into your inbox. You can share it, watch it again. There'll be a Q&A at the end, so please do drop questions into the Q&A, and hopefully we'll get time to answer as many as possible at the end. And then lastly, we will be sharing all the resources. So if you want to take notes, great, take notes, but you don't have to. We'll send everything your way afterwards. So let me welcome our four brilliant guests today. So they each bring a very unique perspective on AI adoption, and I chatted with them all just recently and know that they can all bring so much knowledge and experience to this conversation. So let them introduce themselves. So Gary, let's start with you.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining. Thanks, Lisa. So yeah, my name is Gary Walker. I'm a future of work architect at 22 North. I specialize in architecting like cohesive digital workspaces. A lot of my conversations for the past 18 months have been dominated by AI, not surprisingly so. But obviously, I'm looking at it through a lens of how the AI revolution can kind of leverage humans to flourish rather than being technology led. So kind of a lot of interesting insights to hopefully share with you guys, but always through the leverage of human first rather than AI first. And then aside from that, I'm a husband, father of three children, which keeps me on my toes. And I'm really passionate about well-being and humane technology. So excited to get into this one today. Thanks,
Thanks,
Lisa.
Gary. And over to you, Lou, to introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, my name is 𝗺cie𝗿𝗲𝗆 and I am founder of the �culture𝗿𝗏, and we build culture as a product. So we take product principles, agile principles, Scrum framework, and help businesses to build their people strategy and deliver in short, sharp, focused sprints that keeps things very disciplined and ever evolving and dynamic. And a lot of the conversations that I have, and I suppose the mindsets that I help leaders build through those processes are all very relevant in terms of AI adoption as well, and really creating a lot of comfort not knowing, a lot of curiosity and critical thinking skills into the business and into their culture. And I'll follow Gary's lead outside of work. I'm a mum as well. I've got two kids, and we're foster carers as well. So our house is always a bit chaotic, and I think work-wise that's been very helpful actually.
Amazing. And Jeff, for you next.
Yeah, terrific. Gosh, how to follow those two intros. Amazing. Hi, everybody. I'm Jeff 𝗹𝗆𝗆. I'm the founder and the CEO of 𝗵𝗵𝗏𝗏partners. I'm an American living over here in the UK now for about the last 21 years, and I've spent those years helping organizations build high impact HR functions, typically from scratch. A big chunk of that has always ever been, aside from setting up the kind of like, kind of compliance administration and all those kinds of components, is HR technology to kind of help democratize and kind of spread the technological capabilities around managing people across the organization. So my career has taken me from working with big, giant global, kind of firms and consulting and in all sorts of like areas like around investment banking and pharmaceutical and technology, but technology is my first and primary love. At Big Bear Partners, basically, I work with HR teams now to kind of like really kind of focus on the utilization of AI. It's a much more, kind of holistic and powerful tool, frankly, and really, can kind of help shape the speed with which an organization can respond to just all manner of commercial issues and people issues. So I'm really passionate about AI. I'm really passionate about helping organizations go through the transformation process, which is what we're going to be talking about today. Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here with these two wonderful people, and to kind of go through this. And thanks to Employment Hero for sponsoring this important chat.
Thanks, Jeff. And last but not least, you, Daniel.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for jumping on the webinar today. I'm Daniel. I am one of the senior revenue operations analysts at Employment Hero. So my role is really to enable our go-to-market teams to drive revenue as efficiently as possible within the business. I've spent the last 10 years in high growth SaaS businesses in Manchester, even though I am based down in Melbourne now. 4 of those years spent at an AI machine learning business. And I've really been focused on deploying strategies that enable companies to scale rapidly within a high growth capacity. Since joining Employment Hero, I've been hugely focused in integrating AI into our operations function. So not just as a tool, but fundamentally, how do we shift our approach to problem solving and taking people on that journey with us? So yeah, really excited to dive in.
Amazing. Thanks, guys. So good to have you with us today. So I'm excited to get started on this chat. But before we get into questions, we're running this webinar because of some enlightening outcomes from some research that we did just recently called Work That Works. So with this piece, we set out to explore workplace productivity, and that word kind of conjures up these macroeconomic perspectives and thoughts. But actually what we did was really try to understand what's happening on the ground in UK businesses and how companies are just functioning when it comes to how productive that they can be. So it's a quick note on how we did this. This was a large scale survey. We tested a huge range of factors that drive productivity. We used some correlation analyses, lots of other statistical techniques to really pull out what matters. And it was important we gain perspectives from leaders, but also employees. So we surveyed representation of both groups across the UK in businesses under 1,000 employees. So really looking at the sort of SME space, not the kind of large enterprises. So firstly, this was a standout insight for us, and this kind of led us to want to do webinars and talk about this, because the disconnect that we found between business leaders and employees is stark. So we asked leaders and employees kind of in separate surveys what they think drives productivity, to kind of set them back from their own day to day, but what do they think drives it as a sort of conceptually. And twice as many leaders as employees selecting tech. So that just shows you first and foremost that there's this disconnect there, and they're not thinking in the same way about the role that tech can play. And this next chart really just sums up the situation among employees. They just don't see the importance of tech, and that's sort of relative to other things. So of all those factors that we asked them about when it comes to workplace productivity, the 3 tech-related factors all sit at the bottom. This is from the point of view of employees. And that given that tech is such a sort of obvious and tangible driver of productivity, we found this really surprising. And there's all these other things that kind of floated to the top, many of them being more human-centric factors. And it's not that they're not important, of course, they absolutely are. But it was just an interesting finding that tech was so low on that list. And then we found that 1/3 of employees think that they spend time on inefficient or unnecessary tasks. It's a lot of people that have that opinion about their work. And the interesting thing is that when we isolate those people and we look at how they feel about work, it really impacts their deeper connection they have, the emotions and the connection they have with their job. So those who think that they do a lot of inefficient tasks or that they're doing unnecessary things are less likely to enjoy their job, to feel like it's meaningful, and to even feel like they're valued. And those drops on the right-hand chart there are significant. So there's a big impact for people that are feeling inefficient and where tech or processes are not helping them. And then we asked business leaders if their company had seen productivity increase or decrease over the last year. And among those that said that it had increased, the number one cited reason from the point of view of business leaders was tech advancements. So they're really seeing that happen on the ground. What we're clearly seeing is that employees are not seeing the same thing, or definitely not to the same extent. So there's that kind of disconnect sort of rumbles away. And then bringing this to AI specifically, so we were asking employees in this survey how they feel about AI in their jobs, how much they're using it, and the sort of impact it has on them. And there are a whole bunch of positive effects for employees that do use AI regularly. And two prevalent ones are quality of work and being more creative at work. So I just think they're really important things to focus on, because it gets us away from AI being merely a time saver or a sort of an efficiency driver, or just looking at it from an hours perspective. But actually, if we can really look at it from the perspective of driving quality, driving creativity, driving enjoyment, all those sort of more meaningful ways that people think about their jobs, that kind of gets us to a better place than just seeing it as purely about time saved. And then we found there that there's this big difference in the utilization of AI in the workplace. So more senior employees, so those who are managers or above, are much more likely to use AI in their work, or at least admit to that in the survey, than entry-level employees. So whether that's happening, and it's sort of a reality of AI in work and people's roles, there could be some element of entry-level people not using it because they're worried about using it in work. But anyway, this sort of difference exists, and I think it's worth exploring that from a culture perspective on how we can democratize AI and really think about it for the whole workplace. So there's just some sort of insights there for you. We've got a whole report on this, and then we'll kind of give you a link to that at the end, but just it kind of sets the scene for why we're going to talk about AI and how we can really think about empowering workplaces with that. So before we jump into questions, a quick poll for you guys to answer, and it should pop up on your screen. But what best describes your team's current mindset around AI? 4 options there: curious and exploring, skeptical and cautious, overwhelmed and unsure, or already experimenting. There might be a whole bunch of other kind of permutations about how people feel, but which one kind of best describes where you're at with this, or how you think your company is, or how kind of leadership is? We'll just give a moment to vote on that. Okay, I'm hoping the results pop up any second. All right, a pretty even-ish spread. So number one, already experimenting. So 40% of you in that space, and obviously that would be a huge spectrum of how far your company is along that journey. But a big chunk of people feeling skeptical, cautious, overwhelmed, I'm sure, and I think that is a good representation of what's going on out there. And from our perspective and our experiences, there is a lot of skepticism, some fear among employees, lots of sort of mixed feelings and emotions about this huge transformation and the change that this will bring, and how people feel about their own jobs. Any comments on the results, guys, on what we found from the poll? Does it sort of represent what you found with the companies you work with?
Sorry, Lisa, you're talking to us, the panelists.
Yes, sorry. Yes.
Cool. Yeah, look, I mean, I think this is absolutely a wonderful representation based on at least my experience so far. I'm really, really happy to see that people are, in fact, already experimenting and are curious and exploring. I think that's fantastic. Those numbers have shifted upwards, which is very, very good. But I still absolutely understand the skeptical and the cautious and the overwhelmed and unsure components as well. People have a lot on their plates at the moment, and this just feels like an entirely new, kind of physical body of information to learn. happy to report that actually it's a lot simpler than you think. It's just a matter of, kind of framing up the work and making sure things that concern you about security and things of that nature are in place. But it is an absolute epiphany to start to work with AI, especially with HR data. It's amazing, what kind of three-dimensional, kind of representations you can start to build with people. And it is just night and day compared to where we were, even just 2, 3 years ago. So I think it's great to see.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that's the sort of reality of where we're at, is that there's this huge sort of spectrum of where people are in this space, and it's not just AI enabled versus not AI enabled. There's this kind of massive in between, and it's sort of on a kind of big spectrum, really.
Yeah, and it's everywhere, you know what I mean? And we'll get into this obviously, but it is ubiquitous at this point. It shows up on our phones and our watches, with all of our consumer experiences. And so it is around us. It's just a function now of kind of figuring out how is it we harness it, for the particular use cases we have in HR, which are multitudinous. There are so many different cool opportunities, we have to play with that. So,
Yeah.
so it'll be great to get into.
Okay. Well, let's start with the big picture. Why does AI still feel pretty intimidating to many teams, even though, like you said, Jeff, it's everywhere? We are encountering it in our work, but also outside of work all the time. But it still feels like an intimidating or a sort of difficult thing to get to. So, Daniel, if we can kick it off with you, why do you think that's still the case, that there's sort of this intimidation effect with adopting AI?
Yeah, thanks. Look, I think there's a number of reasons. Ultimately, AI is changing the way that we all work, and even to a certain extent, the way we live. I think for someone even like myself who spent years honing their craft, building skills, and people who are further on in their career journey, 20 years, 30 years into, thinking about how they do their job, they now, potentially need to rethink and add this other layer in about how they do their role with AI in mind. And I think that can just be seen as quite a disruptor because, you kind of got to reorient yourself to, look through your work through this new lens with this AI layer added into it. And I think adding to this pressure, you've got executives and leadership sort of saying, we need to be an AI first company. Everyone needs to upskill on AI. And you're sort of caught between the pressure from, transforming, that into reality, and you've still got to actually do your day job. So, as Jeff was sort of touching on, time is a really important piece. When are people supposed to find the time to learn, experiment when they're already at capacity? And I think also it can sometimes be a little hard to see the wood for the trees. With all the information out there at the moment, I'm sure many people would have seen on LinkedIn someone claiming to revolutionize their business or job with AI. And I think this puts a lot of people in a position where you sort of feel like you're falling behind. And maybe you're also skeptical. You're wondering, is this real? Is it hype? And I think that uncertainty combined with that pressure that we were talking about in business creates that perfect storm of anxiety. So I think a lot of people, I don't know, I definitely was sort of stuck between this. I know I need to move fast, but I'm not 100% sure actually where to start. And I think that's potentially where some of the paralysis sets in.
Yeah, totally. I think when we talk about adopting AI, it's easy to get caught up in the tech itself. So the platforms and the tools, and often the real challenge comes not with the actual tech, but the team and understanding it, trusting it, using it, adapting, sort of integrating into work. So how can we balance the sort of the tools and the tech with that human side of change? And I'll sort of come to each of you on this. So Gary, starting with you, what are some of the common missteps that you've seen small businesses make when rolling out AI-related change?
Yeah, I think I echo some of Daniel's thoughts on this one, but I think some of the common missteps are, I think a lot of organizations are feeling the pressure to be seen to be using AI. So it's almost like the speed of keeping up with it. I kind of reference quite a lot to, for people like myself who have worked in this industry for 3 decades, there was this period of time where everyone talked about data and big data, and no one quite understood what big data was, but they had to be seen to be doing something with big data. And it feels very much like a, excuse me, with a replication of that period. Hey, the world's changing. We're changing the way we work. We need to be seen to be using AI. So the common misstep I'm seeing, or the most expensive mistake at the moment, is a lot of organizations, they're doing the right thing in terms of wanting to invest in AI, but what they're doing is they're activating licenses and then they're kind of just letting people try and figure it out. And they're then coming 6 months later and asking questions about where's the return on investment. And I think what's missing is like the foundation, the integration, and then the transformation. So the organizations that are thriving aren't the ones that are actually moving the fastest. It's the ones that are moving or being so thoughtful about the intentional design of it. Everybody's trying AI, and what I loved about the poll was 41% of people said that. And all of the kind of research and studies that I've got, you've got over 75% of people that are trying AI in society. Now, that's very broad in terms of whether people are using it to replace Google, whether people are actually developing workflows or using assistants or agents, but they are trying it. So I don't think that's a fear. There's a pragmatism to the consistency of it, but I think people are just struggling where to start. And organizations, that's a misstep. They're not really supporting that. Also, with the technology companies, they're hyper focused on features. So when you see any report on AI, it's all about what the AI can do, but they never contextualize that. So if I'm someone working in an organization, no one's really sitting down with me and trying to work out what are the outcomes I'm working towards. How can AI start to support me to leverage what I can do from a human capacity? And I think that's a massive piece missing in adoption, because what companies do is they'll turn on Copilot or Slack or Gemini AI. They'll then allow those account managers to do some trainings, but they're just training them on the features. They're not actually truly understanding the jobs to be done, the outcomes that they're working on. So that's definitely a common misstep. And I think then organizations are realizing 6 months later, why are we not seeing any change here? And then obviously it's multifaceted for all the reasons that Daniel mentioned around job anxiety, being overwhelmed, lack of time to develop these different types of things. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love your analogy to big data. I think it's so true. And this kind of leads nicely into Jeff, if I can ask you this question. Why you think AI adoption is more, or at least just as much about culture as it is about the tech itself? And your experience of working with businesses with culture.
Yeah, and I think Gary touched on this, and I know in our conversations that we have on a regular basis, he kind of points this out, is that this is not about the technology at all. It's about, I guess, the nature of AI as a concept. But this is always ever has to be about solving real business problems. That's first and foremost what we have to stay in our mind. It's not just, kind of having a play and kind of like creating silly videos with AI or anything like that. It's more sort of like what business challenges are we facing? So for instance, do we suffer from a very high attrition rate, say in the 25%, category, and that's way too high. We really want to drive that down to no more, say, than 12%. That's the kind of interesting challenge, with as many data points as you can possibly get in terms of things like exit interview notes and kind of all the kind of demographic information about the employees involved, to then go to AI and say, I've got a really interesting challenge for you, and here's what I need you to be. I need you to be an expert in this particular realm, and here's what it is I'm looking for. And you spell out the context in great detail, along with data points and whatever else you can add. And then you say, can you do me a favor and present it back to me in this form? And then, you say, great, and also use a particular, if necessary, like a tone of voice or kind of an angle on it. But in this case, that doesn't really work. And it's amazing what you get back. What you get back is not a perfect receipt. It is not the be all and end all and the absolute last answer. It's thinking and organizing the information that is very complex and from so many different sources, and it immediately gets your brain going. It gets the cogs moving. And you're like, whoa, yeah, that's a very interesting insight. Let's go chase that some more. And then you basically go and interrogate it. But a lot of people are sort of looking at that, I think, now, from afar, for instance, and all the hype on social media and so forth doesn't help, because it seems like it's that much more intimidating. And people are kind of stepping back going, ooh, this thing is a lot smarter than I am. I'm going to be found out. I'm going to be made to look silly. I don't want to engage with it because it could clearly come and replace my job, and make me look, like half the executive I am. be assured that the gray matter between your ears is a fantastic supercomputer, and it holds so much more context and so much more insight, and so many more layers of knowledge than you can imagine. And that's basically what you then need to kind of parse through to say to an AI, this is the sort of specific type of answer I'm looking for. Can you help me explore this further? And then it becomes like a, an extra bit of brain tissue, if you will, that you didn't have before. It never gets tired. It's always ever focused. But unless you basically start to kind of create the conditions for people to experiment, to have fun, to encourage them, to kind of like go and kind of try to solve business problems, we're never going to get beyond that adoption layer. Because people will always be worried about it. So I think, look, reskilling, upskilling, getting people deeply involved is super, super important in all this.
Yeah, I think at the crux of that, it's making sure that people feel like it's an empowering tool and not a replacement tool. And the job's going to get done with AI. It's actually making you kind of better with AI. So Louis, if I can come to you, you talk about treating culture like a product, and you sort of kind of teased that in the intro earlier. So what do you think that means in the context of AI adoption with that sort of product focused way of thinking about culture?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll maybe start with, I suppose, in a cultural context, what that means in terms of the work that I do. And it's really looking at, I suppose, when you're building a product, or if a company builds a product, whether that is physical or a piece of software. The best companies often use agile principles. They often use Scrum framework, and they work in kind of short, sharp sprints, so 2, 3, 4 week cycles of work. And the goal is never to ship a perfect product, right? The goal is to iterate, get feedback, and to improve over time. So it's taking those concepts and applying it to how you build your culture. And actually, in terms of AI adoption, this is a really great way to have something very tangible to work with. So, if you're at that starting point of just, curiosity, what is this? I fancy having a play around with it, but I don't even know how to approach that. Setting up something like a 2 week sprint around AI adoption is a great way to do it. So you might build out a bit of a roadmap, in a cultural sense. That might be your people and culture strategy. But actually in an AI context, what do we want to achieve, right? And that might be a very simple goal, like we just want to assess value. We want to assess where the value might be for us in adopting AI. You have things like your definition of done, right? So people know when enough is enough, and don't kind of feel that insecurity of, well, I'm not the expert, so I don't know if I've done this right, and it has to be perfect. And then we never really get anything done or over the line. And really importantly, I think in the product world, you've got your user stories. And in a people and culture context, that's your employees, right? That's exploring and understanding on a very deep level, and actually having a bit of an obsession around what are their pain points, where are their blockers, where are their frustrations, and what does our backlog in terms of what we want to do in this sprint need to look like to address some of those things. So I think there's some really practical ways that you can build a very short framework that isn't overwhelming to people, and is a bit of a template for how you might use this over time as well. As a very specific example, you could have a 2 week sprint with a people and culture team, and the goal is just to find a tool that can replace a manual task, or at least support with the efficiency of a manual task. And your definition of done could be something as simple as, we'll be clear on whether it works or it doesn't work. And that kind of, I suppose, drilling it down to that detail for your people is a much easier way for them to understand that it isn't this overwhelming thing that Daniel mentioned earlier on, because I think that's often the assumption that comes with it. You've got to build in your principles around that as well, importantly. That might be prompt critique. So, you're not really accepting this will never work without evidence from your people. Why didn't it work? What prompt did you use? What could you have done better? And using things like stand-ups to help your team best practice share, right? So that's an opportunity for people to talk about the warts and all of what went wrong, and have a bit of fun in the process as well, but actually getting really comfortable not knowing, not being the experts, and sort of just enjoying the process of that as well. I think one of the other things that I think is a great way to, if you're at that very starting point of what you might do here, If you've worked with developers or in a technical environment before, you might have heard of something called a developer anarchy day. And that's something I would have run when I was in-house for our engineering teams. But actually, that's applicable wherever there's a problem in a business. And I think AI is a brilliant use case for an anarchy day where you get your team together, don't tell them it's happening, put something else in the diary and say, we want to have some fun with this. Go away for the day. We're going to regroup at 4 p.m. and here's the guardrails, right? No personal data. We all know that. But other than that, come back with what AI can do to solve the problems that you have. And I think that's a really great way for people to connect the right feeling, because they're going to have a feeling either way, but actually, for them to take a bit of joy in the process as well and have fun with it.
Yeah, I think that that's so important that the whole team and as many people as possible are involved in that process, because oftentimes they're not, and it's a sort of top-down mandate. And it sounds like there's a kind of role for everyone being involved. So lastly on this topic, so Daniel, from your perspective in RevOps, how has AI changed the way that you and your team work day to day? Just some really tangible sort of examples of how that's impacted you guys.
Yeah, definitely. I think like many businesses and people, we've benefited from tools like Gemini and ChatGPT. A lot of these tools have become mainstay in sort of our day-to-day workflows. So they help us, summarize a lot of our communications. We do a lot of project work, so it helps us draft our project scopes, thinking through ideas, different ways to solve problems. And I think even for more technical work where we're, building on our CRM, having instant access to something that essentially answers most of the technical challenges that we come up every day against is awesome. But I think what's been interesting is, and the real change for us isn't so much the tools themselves, and I think that seems like a bit of a theme in the conversation. It's really the mental shift that we've had to create within our team. So like for us, revenue operations is probably what I would call like a high leverage role. The processes we build, the automations that we create in our team, they optimize and touch everything that sales, marketing, and our customer success teams do. So when we level up as a team, we're basically not only just getting better at our jobs, we're helping the rest of the business come along that journey. And I think the biggest mindset shift for us and our team is accepting that better might take slightly longer. So a challenge for us has been, we'll encounter a problem and we know how to solve that problem the traditional way. It might take us 2 weeks, but what we're trying to do now is if we took 3 or 4 weeks to actually, do this, so an extra 2 weeks, and built this with AI at the core, how much better could the outcome be? And the investment upfront might be slightly more, project timeline might be extended, but the solution that we have delivered by spending a little bit more time on it has returned 10x. So I think the big learnings have been, take the time to carve out to, think about the long-term strategy, and give your team the headspace to actually think about how to solve some of these problems with AI.
Great, thanks. So we'll going to move on to the next section, which leads us nicely into how we actually shift those perceptions in employees and in workplaces. So if we're thinking about introducing AI, it's not just about those systems, but how we can reshape people's minds about it and how they think about it in general. So a few quick questions here, Gary. What's the biggest myth that you've encountered about AI in the workplace with the companies you've worked with?
I think with the type of work that I do, probably the biggest myth is that AI is going to solve all your information retrieval problems. I see that consistently over the last 18 months. Just to give context to that, so I think this will resonate with everyone that's on the call and attendees. So when you try to find a bit of information, typically it's quite a painful process because normally organizations have fragmented information, multiple different tools, they're kind of drowning in tool sprawl. 9 out of 10 searches, if you look at the reports and studies, you won't get the return you're looking for if you need the information you need. And also you end up typically interrupting a colleague or interrupting someone else or multiple people to get the information you need. So one of the myths that I see quite a lot is, oh, okay, if we layer on Slack AI as a bolt-on or Asana AI or Gemini or Copilot, that's going to solve that problem. It won't solve the problem unless you fix the foundations. So if we use knowledge management as an example, unless you have content owners and you have accurate content, it's trusted content. If you don't invest the time up front to do that, you're just getting the illusion of efficiency. And what that then does is it compounds over time because you're obviously trying to drive AI adoption. But as people are using it, if you've not done that work up front, they're going to start to distrust the information that they get. Therefore, they will then start to be a lot more pessimistic about the opportunity. So, to sort of dispel that myth, one of the organizations I work with were really intentional around all their SOPs, all their guidance, all their information that they host from different platforms. Having content owners, having people with accuracy, marking it as verified so it can be trusted information. And then when you layer AI, so it might be a tool like Super, or it might be that you're plugging in like Copilot or something and you're going to like mine multiple locations, but as long as that information is trusted, that's when you see the true value of it. And that's when you're seeing like, so one of the studies this year with 𝗹𝗶𝗸𝗆 was people are losing about 33 days a year just trying to find information they need to do their job. So if you think if you're in a sales job or a go-to-market job, even if you're HR, anything you do, you're always trying to find accurate information. Just think of the time that you give back by solving that problem. So that's definitely a massive one. And I think people underestimate, like, again, it comes back to speed versus being thoughtful and intentional about your design. If you want to do this right and you want to see the benefits of it, you need to invest that time up front to fix those foundations, but also to Lou's point, you have to look at it like an ever-evolving, living, breathing thing. It's not a one and done. You need to keep on doing that. Hopefully, at some point, AI will do the maintenance of that and the accuracy of it. But at this point, that's definitely a massive gap, which can be solved. And when it is solved, it's massive benefits for people to allow them to do, I suppose, more meaningful work. So yeah.
Yeah. It's such a mundane sort of problem, but it's so prevalent of where can I find, this sort of idea of I
Well,
need
yeah, it resonates with
to
everyone,
know
doesn't
it's
it?
there
Like,
somewhere.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, everybody has that problem. So yeah.
Yeah. Jeff, for you next, how do you think we can move that conversation from AI is coming to AI is here and now what? Because I think there's still this rhetoric about it's there, like it's coming, it's going to come your way. But yeah, how do we sort of make people think actually it's now?
Yeah, I mean, it is everywhere, obviously, and a lot of us experience this stuff not so subtly on social media. It tends to kind of pop up, and those algorithms are super powerful and kind of steer us in those directions. Look, I think the easiest way to do this is to get over the fear, to get over the anticipation, to get over the concern that I'm going to do it wrong. And therefore I don't want to do it, or it's going to show me up, and that sort of thing, is just to get into it. And I'm really big on this now, having gone through several cycles as a consultant, wanting to go straight into big AI transformation gigs, but only to realize that we couldn't even get beyond proposal stage because people internally were sort of like, "You're going to do what? No way. That's not going to happen. We don't even know what the ROI of this stuff is. We've never used it before. This is absolutely fresh territory for us, and we're not willing to take that risk." And so I've kind of pivoted, excuse me, a little bit, and my focus now is on actual practical involvement, doing live demonstrations with people. And you'll see, some of the videos that'll pop up with my work with 𝗹𝗶𝗸𝗆, and I'm very soon going to develop a curriculum with the Business Forum Institute, our Business Forum International, to create a curriculum around training. It's just getting on screen and showing people, look, this is how you basically upload the data to then, kind of interrogate it and use AI to your advantage. And then here's how you shape the information, and here's how you, kind of evaluate it, and how you use critical thinking to make sure it's the right information, and all these sorts of bits. And suddenly people are kind of pulled out of fear mode, and being stuck or kind of intellectually paralyzed about it all, to, wow, that's really cool. I hadn't seen that coming. That's really fascinating. Can we try this? Can we try that? And just letting it flow for people. So that's what it's all about, getting hands-on with AI and realizing how easy it is to work with, but importantly, what your role as the human being in that loop is. And it's big. It's all around judgment and critical thinking and evaluation and determination, and kind of being a bit like a detective, like a real Sherlock Holmes, with this stuff. But it's also cool because it kind of gives you the intellectual power of a Sherlock Holmes. So that would be my thinking.
Great. And Lou, if I can come to you for a real quick answer on what would be the one micro shift that you think people, leaders can make when they're trying to embed AI into their team culture? That's for you, Lou. Thanks.
Mute. Apologies. I'm going to keep this very simple because I think the answer to this is probably applicable in any change setting, and that is to sit with your people. And I mean the line managers, right? To sit with the people doing the work. Most line managers have been an individual contributor at some point, but it might have been a few years ago. There might have been a lot of change in the business since. And I suppose even if you are a subject matter and you understand the work that people do and you understand their world and the pain points and the blockers, I would consider, do your people feel that way as well? Do they feel understood? How have you shown them that you understand that? And how confident are they that the decisions that are made in the business are made with that depth of understanding of what their experience is? And I think when that comes to AI adoption and any change really, when you come to communicating the change, the what's in it for me becomes very clear because you know what matters most to your team. Your requests and, an ask to experiment and be curious and open their minds to this is grounded in their reality. And they have the confidence in you as a leader that you've done that work to understand it. And, fundamentally resistance drops when that happens. People feel like you get their world. I mean, I think in terms of confidence, credibility is a big part of that for leaders. And actually people really feeling understood and heard is the best way for them to be able to put the armor down and actually just consider maybe that there might be something and some value in it for them.
Yeah, I love that because we found from the work that Works report that recognition is so important and just feeling valued and feeling seen to get people to be productive. So it's, it's a line there to sort of, really kind of put the more focus there. So on the next section, psychology of change, that kind of gets us to how we think about change. Gary, what team practices have you seen work well when thinking about AI usage and sort of building that psychological safety that people need when they, are met with such a huge shift in how they do their work?
Yeah, there's a few things here. I think leadership is probably the most critical one. So leadership vulnerability is probably the best word rather than just training programs. So behavior breeds behavior. And I think it's important that what you're seeing in a lot of the studies are people are experimenting with AI, they are trying it, but you'll see a real reluctance to them admitting that they're using AI, and that comes back to the job anxieties, but also comes back to the culture that's been created within the organization. And safety comes from comfort, not competence in essence. So I think people need to be protected to explore, to fail. I think people will really surprise you if you give them that space to go and experiment and try. I think also sharing lessons learned, I think is massively valuable. Again, that comes back to the cultural piece, but creating a way that you can do that. So failures and successes, they're going to like build collective confidence. So I think the solution here is definitely when you're driving adoption of AI is like, I know a lot of people go on about like adoption communities and stuff, but they are really powerful when they're done well and they're focused on outcome focused use cases. I think protecting time to allow people to go and explore and also give honest feedback loops as well. And then I think it's really important from leadership to sort of say, look, learning matters more than you trying to look competent here. Like, and that comes back to like a clear like adoption strategy. So you might have a lesson, like one thing that's worked for me in the past is within an adoption community, you might have a general channel where people come together and we share different hints and tips. There might be like real context there where an adoption evangelist might go out and work with different teams or departments to understand what they're trying to achieve, not just map that, but rethink it and then show them how AI can support them. But one of the most popular channels used to be like lessons learned because people were just being really like open and honest around, hey, I tried this, it didn't work. And then another team can come in and say, hey, we actually tried it this way, that worked really well. And that just builds not only confidence, but it builds community as well. So like that's really, really important. But for me, it always comes back to your leadership. Like it always has to be like the behavior definitely breeds behavior when it comes to that, which is quite interesting when you look at your research, because your research said that leaders have definitely had more time and they've been looking at AI a bit more, and people underneath are not, and that comes back to your culture 9 times out of 10. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks. So just thinking about mindset shifts then. So what do you think is necessary? I'll ask this to Daniel. What mindset shifts have you seen in your team and the sort of the business that enables AI to work and sort of be adopted effectively?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Gary and Lou and Jeff in terms of like creating that psychological safety. It's super important. I think fundamentally, if you want AI to work in your business, you've got to have an environment of learning. So the teams that succeed with AI at the moment, I think the goal should be failure. So like I speak to my team, like how many things have you got wrong this week? How many things have you come up against, head against the wall and managed to push through and figure out the solution? I think creating that environment is really important. That this isn't about, look, I know every business is super focused on trying to drive ROI and results, and yes, those are the outcomes we want to push for. But I think in order to bring people along the journey, you've got to put the bar low enough for them to enter and to actually start having a go and practicing. I think the second thing that has been hugely successful for us at Employment Hero is moving as a collective to upskill on AI. I think, we have regular touch points throughout the month, and Lou was sort of alluding to this before with the engineering teams, but all different areas of our business come together and share different AI use cases, the problems they've encountered and where they need help. And I think that collective approach changes everything. Instead of, sort of learning alone, every setback sort of feels like a personal failure. But when you come together, everyone's experimenting, it sort of normalizes that learning curve. So yeah, the priority for us in our team is making mistakes and sharing those and just trying to improve.
Amazing. Yeah, it's such a nice culture to build that people feel safe to do that. So moving on to some sort of, very tangible way to think about adopting AI. So one is communication. You touched on that, Daniel, actually, about how you can come together and communicate as teams. Lou, if I can ask you this question, what communication habits have you seen that help teams embrace AI with more confidence? What kind of tangible things have you witnessed that you can impart on us?
Yeah, I think that's a nice follow on from what Gary said, really around vulnerability. I think leaders who can name what's going on for them, but also acknowledge what they probably know is going on for other people in terms of how they're feeling. And that might be that we don't know what we don't know at this point, right? Not over committing, not over promising, what the end point is going to look like. And actually, Gary, I think you said as well, leaders have been probably talking about this and planning it in the background for such a long period of time. I use the marathon analogy a lot, right? They're halfway through and there's people in the business who can't even see the start line. And I think sometimes when as leaders we're in that place, it can be quite natural that the communication focuses on the positives and the value and how amazing it all is. And we've all felt that feeling of disappointment when it hasn't landed in the same way for the people in the business. And I think really just acknowledging and saying out loud, we know this is where you're probably at with this. We understand the assumptions that come with this. This is how we're feeling. And keeping it very simple and planning in those iterations, right? So we just want to be curious. We just want to assess that value, keep it to something that's really relevant and tangible to their people. And I think the other thing that I would probably say in terms of comms as well is measuring or making it measurable and doing that in quite a visible way for your people. So whether that's pulse surveys or whether there's a specific KPI that you're hoping to improve by using AI, communicating that really regularly to your people along with those initial objectives and over communicating them almost is very helpful. But I would also say pressure testing your own claims is massively important, and that's coming back to that credibility piece for leadership. So, are we pulling that KPI because it kind of suits the narrative or the end goal or the objective that we're trying to get to, or is it actually, is this a result of AI and we can actually show our people that's the case? Because people will see through anything that's not completely honest. So I think when it comes to communication and AI adoption, honesty, vulnerability, naming what we're feeling, what our people are probably feeling, and actually just sitting with that for a minute at the start, I think is really important for people.
Great. So actually, in the last section we have is this real world adoption in SME. So I want to get really practical in this part and the next piece on how companies can actually do this and what that sort of looks like on the ground in reality. So Gary, you work closely with SMEs. What advantage do you think that a small business actually has when it comes to adopting AI? You know, that there's maybe a misconception it's harder for a smaller company because they have less resources, maybe less existing knowledge. But what do you think their advantage is if we think about that small business?
Yeah, I think small businesses have the same advantage that they've kind of had with everything that's come, every new wave of future ways of working and different ways of working is they're small, so they're far more adaptable. That's just the reality of it. If you look at an incumbent style organization, it's the Titanic trying to like change direction. So with a small company, it's just like you're in a speedboat in essence. So you've got the ability to sort of navigate in a different way. I think with that though comes different pressures because obviously you don't have the same financial resources sometimes. So what you've got to be is a lot more thoughtful around trying to understand where are the workflows where this could really up levels. So some of the repetitive tasks, some of the workflows which do take a bit of time. A great example would be recently for one organization I was working with, they were spending, like the leaders were spending maybe about 45 minutes researching prospective clients. So it was a sales team, a revenue, and an ops team. They had like a license to a CRM. And when I was getting into like, what's your traditional way of doing this? Like, what is the outcome you're trying to work towards? And they're like, well, before we go on that call, we just want to know a bit more information about that person. I was like, right, okay. And I was like, so okay, so that's very time consuming, 45 minutes when you're doing that. And I was like, when do you typically do that? And they were like, about 5 minutes before we meet with the person. And I was like, right, okay, so it's not a 45-minute task. And obviously it's not happening. So what we were able to do was just create a workflow, which basically whoever they were meeting, they could put that information into the assistant, show them the workflow. The workflow would then connect it to their CRM, it connected to their Slack interface. And then on LinkedIn, we just put a little button. So when they click that on that person, it would automatically go away and it would find any relevant information of have we spoke to this person before? Are they already in our CRM? Have we any communications with them? It also looked at their LinkedIn to say, hey, what's this person been posting about? What's the company that they're working on? How does that match the stuff that we're talking about and what we're selling? What are the conversation starters? Now, that sounds pretty overwhelming, but that piece of work was just here's a use case which consumes a lot of time. It's a repetitive one. And within 20 minutes, and it did literally take 20 minutes to build that workflow, they then now just have one button to click, which then goes and gets that information for them. So I think small businesses have that massive opportunity where if they are losing a lot of time for these kind of repetitive tasks, as long as they've got people or they can be curious, so they can go and like if they are paying for AI, they can bring in people from those companies to kind of map those use cases. I think those are always great examples just to start. I've probably sold quite a big example there, but I'm just trying to say like within 20 minutes you can go and do that information when it's up to levels. So yeah, that for me is like a massive advantage for small companies. They can just go even knowledge I was talking about earlier, so their knowledge management, their SOPs or guidance, they can get that in order a lot quicker than bigger companies. So again, they can see the benefits of AI once they layer that on top. So yeah, there's so many opportunities if you're in a small or medium enterprise. I do think it's kind of knowing where to start sometimes, and that can be a little bit more difficult if you don't have the right guidance. So
Yeah. Okay, I'm aware we're sort of approaching time, and I want to get to some of the questions that we have in the Q&A. And there's a really interesting one here, and I think this actually links to a question I was just going to ask you guys anyway about non-obvious use cases of AI, but low barrier still. You know, we don't want to kind of, you know, we're not sort of talking crazy, but what are some of the ways that you've seen businesses adopt AI in ways where it, you know, it might be less obvious? And this relates to a question we had on the Q&A with this attendee who runs and owns a hospitality business and 16 employees, would love to implement AI, but it's such a hands-on industry and it's not the obvious space perhaps for AI to immediately, you know, help and go into. So thinking about that question with that sort of industry, but more widely, how do we think about AI for the sort of the non, you know, tech, non sort of office-based companies that are out there? Maybe I can start with you, Lou.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this myself here, but I think, Jeff, you've given some great examples there. I think in any context, AI in terms of DE&I is very useful. I've seen it be very useful in particular for neurodivergent employees, where it's massively helpful with communication. And I think sometimes I see myself, and I'm sure others have as well, AI in terms of content and communication and generating that communication or that content can get a bit of a bad name. But actually, you know, when you look at that with more of a critical lens, it's incredibly helpful and helps a lot of people actually access a lot more opportunities as well. So I think, you know, even where roles may not be desk-based or, you know, even have access to a computer, just actually helping your people communicate in the way that, you know, is helpful for them, useful for them. AI can be incredibly useful. So yeah, I suppose it's looking at it in those broader terms and not, you know, this is a great example of where it doesn't have to be about tech. And this is about people and actually just encouraging them to use it in that way.
Yeah, and I'd love, Jeff, I know you put some amazing answers on the Q&A there to that question, but just would love you to just walk through just a couple of those, and you're thinking about the sort of the non-obvious space for AI, especially non-obvious industries or interesting ways you've seen it integrated that you know kind of a bit different.
Yeah, sure. And yeah, thanks for that. So it is funny because a lot of times people are like, well, AI kind of would fit perfectly in sort of a professional office environment, right? Where everybody's got desktops or laptops or things of that nature and do lots of like heady knowledge-based kind of thinking, consulting, and all sorts of fancy things like that. But in truth, AI actually has fantastic uses for organizations that are ones that we kind of engage with every day, including restaurants, including, you know, hotels and things of that nature. In fact, I would be shocked, especially for the larger chains, if they don't actually have tools that actually help manage their booking systems, as an example, and kind of like manage the complex web and matrices around all that kind of stuff. But I mean, you know, talking about like a smaller 60-person business, I think in this particular instance, where look, every minute, you know, every minute saved is a minute, you know, you can kind of like delete, kind of like drive back into delivery. So your time is precious. Everybody's time is precious. And to have knowledge at your fingertips as a member of that team on the go. So at a mobile first application would be super useful. And to have a voice interface versus a typing interface would be super amazing. And there are some really fascinating tools. So you look at things like streamlining recruitment and the onboarding. Your attrition rate in that area is probably very high, and people probably stay there. I don't know what, on an average, I'm guessing of eight months to maybe 24 months max. And so your recruitment challenges are many. So streamlining that process using AI to screen CVs and schedule interviews and get first run get first stage Q&A via chatbots done, and using tools like Paradox. I think they have a tool called 𝗹𝗶𝗸𝗆 that helps manage candidate queries and schedule interviews and all sorts of things. Scheduling of staff, nightmare. You know what I mean? People last minute can't do it. I'm sick. I'm off. Whatever it is. To have an AI powered, rota tool that basically can balance everybody's availability and the costs and predict, the busy periods and kind of staff in advance for that. Super useful. Lots of interesting tools like 𝗹𝗶𝗸𝗲 or 7shifts, as an example, can help with that. Automating repetitive admin is a nightmare, for hospitality things. So again, tools like Lena AI, for policy automation, or Otter AI for meetings and briefings and summaries and things of that nature, super useful. This way you don't have to take notes and you don't have to have your thoughts scattered all over the place. It can just be into one app. Inventory supply management and guest experience insights, again, would be other areas where AI could just consume loads of complicated data and churn it up and basically come out with some brilliant insights in terms of patterns, merging, and recommendations as to how you can improve. So AI can be used for just about any use case. It doesn't kind of stretch the imagination too far to see that it can really kind of help manage lots of disparate, unstructured data and kind of make sense of it quite early.
Fantastic. I would love to be able to answer some more questions. I'm aware we have 1 minute left, so I'll just leave you guys with the thought of, while we're at time, if we can end with your sort of actionable way of thinking, is if you could leave the session after, after this and sort of think about things differently, what would that be? What would be the next thing you could do off the back of this? And it can be small. So, yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Massive thank you to all of our guests, to Gary, Jeff, Daniel, and Lou. Your insights are so valuable. I hope everyone found that useful. Remember, the recording will be sent to you along with all the resources. And if you have any questions from today, please do get in touch. We can put you in touch with the speakers and also, help answer. We'd love to hear from you, so don't hesitate to do that. And if I can just end with the QR code, you can access that Work That Works report that we've just launched via there and on our website. So that's the full productivity report, and AI features as one of our drains, but also one of the gains. So you can read more about that in that report. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for our wonderful speakers. And yeah, take care. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.